So in this video today, we are talking about something to do with exercise that I think everyone that works out needs to hear. I think it's going to be potentially the most impactful video I ever make because of the negative downsides of this little bit of information most of us don't have, and we only kind of get to know it when we hit a problem. And I want to make this video so I can prevent you from walking far down that path just like I did. In this video today, we're going to talk about exercise addiction, and it is not as obvious as it looks. We're going to talk about exercise as a coping mechanism, and then we're going to talk about burning through stress and working through exercise when you're stressed and the damaging effects that can have. As someone who coaches health, fitness, nutrition, who loves working out myself, I have encountered a really big problem in my own life due to the way that I exercise and circumstances that have affected me from the outside. And I wanted to tell you about that. At the same time, I love exercising. And in the last few months, I've become a little bit more aware around my relationship with exercise. And I want to highlight this to you because becoming active is such a beautiful thing. But at the same time, too much of something good, we know it can turn into a bad thing. And we kind of ignore that when it comes to something that is really framed as kind of this healthy, positive thing in our life with no downsizing cost, which is exercise. We don't really think about it in the same context as something else like smoking or drinking or all these other things that also give us, at least for the short term, some feel-good hormones. Now, I don't want to bucket exercise and health into that same area as alcohol and smoking, but I do want to talk about it in the form of addiction. I'm going to really quickly tell you about an example I had and the story and why I'm telling you this. And we're going to jump into the three elements. So I've exercised my whole life. I've played squash. I've been in the gym since I was 16. I coach this stuff. I love it. It is an amazing way for me to have got through life, to have really embraced taking care of my health, to have built a community and a lot more. But the one thing I have become more interested in and become more aware of recently is actually my ability to use exercise to deal with stressful moments, but also potentially just relying on exercise as a form of therapy, a coping mechanism, etc. And the three things I talk about in this video kind of came together for me in a culmination of things when there was external circumstances that were stressful to my life. And it ended up blowing up things I was doing when it came to my health and fitness in a really, really big way. And there are downsides to overtraining, using exercise as a coping mechanism, physical and mental, that I'm going to talk about in this video. Ultimately, what happened to me last year, I went through an incredibly stressful time at work. So I work part-time as a finance professional. I also coach part-time. So I'm managing two things, which in itself is really stressful. But in my finance role, I ultimately went through a really poor time with the people I was working with, and it became incredibly taxing mentally. And it was a chronic stress because it was a stress that happened. It was quite significant over a long period of time. The other thing that happened last year was my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and he battled that for 8 months in hospital, then ultimately lost the battle to cancer. And as you can imagine, that brought up external circumstances that were really difficult to deal with. And I want to talk about this in this video because, yes, so many of us use health, exercise, nutrition as we should to stay healthy, resilient, so that when external circumstances come up, we can be there, show up in the way that we need to and manage them really well. But sometimes overdoing those things in exercise, which I'm going to talk about shortly, and at the same time, not managing our mental stresses at work or, in other ways, and in many ways, sometimes abandoning ourselves in order to do these things. And we use exercise potentially as a coping mechanism, can become really unhealthy. For me, that stress came to a real threshold. I hit my threshold and I went way past it. I ended up paying the cost of it in terms of poorer mental health, really difficult nervous system regulation and mental and emotional regulation. My capacity for emotions and managing them just went down and down and down. So much so that I kind of just wanted to check out of many things. And I also caught COVID shortly after my dad's passing. And I'm going to talk about this shortly in the rest of this video. But it taxed my immune system to the point where I actually ended up getting physical pains that lasted a really long time and impacted my training. Now, I'm going to talk about one addiction. Addiction when it comes to exercise, not in the context of all these other stresses, but it's a feel good thing, right? When we exercise, we release feel good hormones and we can feel really good about ourselves. We have runner's high, we have exercise high, and look, let's be real, it just feels good to take care of ourselves, and it should. But there comes a point when we over-exercise, and the good sign for that is if you don't rest enough. We all know that in order to benefit from exercise, we should also be resting and recuperating. But an issue I've always had, and something I even coach, but no, I'm very aware that I suffer from this problem myself, is not resting enough. I love practicing calisthenics, which is handstands, muscle ups, playing squash. I like to play tennis. I have such a huge amount of things that I want to do. I can often neglect the rest element that's required. And the rest element would actually make me get better quicker than the way that I train sometimes, because I tend to overtrain. And if you're someone also who tends to overtrain, then to a certain degree you have an addiction problem, because you are doing something like exercising in an addictive way that is actually taking away and has a negative impact in parts of the way that you're going about it, which is your rest and recovery. So you are slightly addicted to it, because if you were smarter, you would perhaps train a little bit less, maybe less intensity, rest more, and you would get an even better result. So that's what we're talking about when it comes to exercise addiction. It can become a real pull to be in the gym all the time. And let's just be real, it's not just about the training aspects, the community aspect. You see people, you might do classes with people, maybe it's a social setting you just enjoy being in. It can become an addiction, and we need to become aware of that. Just because, and we're going to talk about the second element of it, may end up being a coping mechanism as well. Now, the second part of this I'm talking about is a coping mechanism. Let's say we have a stressor and we use exercise to manage that stressor. Maybe it's going for a run. A lot of people, when they encounter stress, they might go out for a run. I actually did this myself in the passing of my dad. I've been using running as a way to alleviate my mood sometimes. We may also just go to the gym and train, because lifting weights, etc., makes us feel really good. Lots of things we may do as a coping mechanism for stress. And I don't think this is demonized as much as maybe it should be. And I don't think it should be fully demonized, but I think we should be talking about it in the health and wellness world as much as I am going to up to now. And the reason for that is, we say, have a stressful day at work, go work it out in the gym. Have a stressful day at home, go work it out in the gym, go for a run, burn it off, all these other things. This is great, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. But this is great also when perhaps you have a stress and you can't do anything about that stress in the short term. Well, to manage that stress, maybe it does work really well to go and exercise it off. And then we need to talk about intensity, because, too much intense, stressful exercise, only kind of, you don't realize it at the time, but only kind of compounds and adds to the stress. So maybe it needs to be more moderate. So you have a stress and you deal with it using health and exercise. Okay, fine. The issue with this is, and as you begin to use health as a coping mechanism, and that might be exercise, the issue with this is, as you start to use exercise as a coping mechanism, you may have problems and stresses that come up that actually you need to deal with. Maybe you need to sit in the discomfort with. And I've become more attached to this kind of way of thinking, having gone to a 5-day silent meditation retreat recently, and it forced me to sit in the discomfort. I wasn't allowed to work out. They specifically said, don't do press ups and all this other stuff. And it made me sit in this discomfort a little bit longer. And it really highlighted to me that sometimes you need to sit in the thought. Sometimes you need to process the stress and what it's telling you. By always going and working out and exercising, which would have been something I do and still currently that I do sometimes, you can kind of kick this can down the road. Now, if this thing is not going away, maybe it's work, and for the next year you're going to be in that job and you need to manage it the best you can, then maybe working out and managing it through exercise is a really beautiful thing, but you also consciously know you need to change that job. But maybe this stressor, you're not dealing with it. Maybe it's a thought, maybe it's a circumstance you may need to change, or something you need to just think about a little bit more. And every time you go to the gym, it gives you that little bit of high, it kind of manages that stress, and then you feel like you don't have to think about this anymore. Exercise is also a beautiful thing, so you just keep going every week because it feels really good for many different reasons. And then you never think about this stress or process it. And that's the coping mechanism. I think it's really, really interesting. One I've come more to terms with recently, and also connected with the fact that actually you can kick a problem, kick a can down the road for a couple of years or even longer when it comes to exercise, because it is such a great coping mechanism. And at the same time, it's not demonized like things like drugs, alcohol, all these other things. Even meditation to a certain degree could be a coping mechanism. Exercise can be a coping mechanism, and then you don't actually end up dealing with something. And then maybe when you take time out for yourself, maybe when you stop exercising or reduce exercising a little bit, those thoughts come up and you realize, actually, I needed to do something about this, not just keep burning it off. The final one is actually working and training with stress in the system. Now, I want to really talk about this one carefully, which is the fact that, yes, maybe doing moderate exercise, walking, all these other things are incredibly powerful ways to burn out stress and regulate your mental health. But what happened to me, and I didn't realize it at the time, was when my dad was sick and I was going through this kind of situation at work, my stress levels and hormones like adrenaline and cortisol were ramping up. And what I realized now, looking back on it, was that in the gym, I was able to train harder and for longer for quite a few sessions in the time around the time my dad was passing. My sessions went from usually about 60 minutes. I would train now for 60 minutes. Now, hard things, right? Really difficult things on my nervous system, like muscle ups, like single leg squats, handstands, all these other things. And at the time, I noticed that we're getting better. Deadlifts, getting heavier and heavier. And what I didn't credit it for was the fact that I was actually using a huge amount of adrenaline and cortisol in my system to take my training even further. Now, the other thing I did was my workouts got a bit longer. At the end of the workout, I'd actually go on a treadmill and run intervals for like 20 minutes. My workouts ended up becoming 90 minutes. And I kind of knew it, but I didn't really connect with it. And I didn't think this was a bad thing. Because at that time, when you are in flight or flight or in high stress mode, which I was, and even though I coach this stuff, your vision kind of narrows. You kind of stop seeing from your peripherals and really taking an overview approach. That's just the nature of stress. And that's what I was kind of doing to myself. At the same time, I used to actually not eat as much. Stress can suppress your appetite. I was quite busy. I would get to the hospital. I would maybe go and get a coffee, maybe grab a sandwich with my sister if I had the time. I didn't feel like eating, but I should have been eating because I was training harder than I've ever trained before, getting unbelievable results and taxing my system, and at the same time not eating. So again, ramping up my nervous system, putting my nervous system under much more demand and not kind of bringing it back to safety. I actually started training with a sprinter at the same time back then because I wanted to learn sprinting. And sprinting is also incredibly taxing on the nervous system, as well as just doing any new exercise and any new movement for your body. So I was doing all these things and I was using adrenaline to train in the gym. Now, all my things were getting better, my deadlifts, my handstands, all this stuff. I was taxing my body in such a high way. And my body wasn't really giving me signals because I was running on adrenaline that this is hurting, that is hurting. I was just getting through it. Now, after my dad passed, things changed where the stress level was not low, but it was a little bit less than watching someone terminally pass and knowing that moment is coming. Then maybe my body started to take a little bit of a break for itself. The other thing we know is when your adrenaline and cortisol stress hormones are high, you suppress your immune system because your body is just directing all energy to fight, flight, or deal with this stressor. And normally it thinks it's a physical stressor. Now, obviously seeing my dad pass is a mental stressor. I don't really need energy to watch that. I don't need to get away from it. It's just a stressor. But my body was just dumping lots of energy into my bloodstream, and lots of things happened physiologically and biologically that I had to deal with after. Now, in the aftermath of my dad's passing, so it's actually quite common for people to get sick after a passing or after a stressful period, just because your immune system has been suppressed for such a long time, and then it needs help to come back online. And you're obviously really depleted in energy and all these other things like muscle recovery, and who else knows what other damage is done during high stress mode needs to also be recovered. So resources are low, but demands are quite high. Then I got COVID, and that meant introducing another stressor to my body, which is a virus. Now, the body can't really tell the difference between an emotional and a physical stress. So that just put even more burden on my nervous system. I ended up getting, like I said before, pains that really lasted into the long term that didn't make any sense in parts of my body, and maybe I wasn't training, or discomfort, and some of that would have just been related to stress, because we can hold stress, we can tense our muscles, perhaps our abdominal region, because we're kind of bracing for this negative thing that's about to happen. Perhaps our arms and peripherals can get a little bit fuzzy and a little bit tingly. All these things start to happen physiologically when you're going through a big stress. The reason I wanted to make this video today was to highlight to you things I would do differently if I went back again, which is, number one, really manage your work stress. Sometimes some battles are worth not having just to prevent entering a certain element of stress in your daily job, and that becomes chronic stress. So try and manage that the best you can. Don't use exercise as a coping mechanism. Sometimes there are things there that you need to deal with. So kind of tap into exercise if you need to, and you can't change something and it makes you feel good. But go there and kind of interrogate the thoughts and the things that are driving you to have stress in your life, to see if there are any possible solutions and anything else you need to be doing. Don't let exercise become an addiction. Addiction in many ways kind of taps into, I think, something to do with our own self-worth, not feeling good enough, that we feel the need to perfect these things and continually work on these things. I think there's two elements. One, we don't feel good enough, we want to perfect something like a handstand, a muscle up, all these other things, and we get a little bit unhealthily addicted to it. Also, it's easy to get addicted to progress because it feels really good, releases good hormones in the body, and you just get addicted to actually the benefit of progress that feels good, just like, I don't know, a cigarette smoker would say a cigarette feels really good. So be careful with your addiction. And the final one is, if you're going through a really stressful time, actually hit pause. Try and keep up with your workouts in a regular fashion, and don't try to burn off the stress with numerous high intensity workouts during the week, where you might be doing high intensity workouts or just lifting lots of heavy weights, doing lots of repetitions, all this other stuff. You are going to feel like you can burn this energy off because you're running on adrenaline and cortisol. But the reality is, you want to take time to rest for yourself, even though it might be really difficult to do that. Don't blow the doors off your nervous system, is what I'm trying to say. Is because your body can't tell the difference between emotional stress and physical stress. So if you're trying to burn off emotional stress in a physical way, do it moderately. Otherwise, your nervous system is ramping up and up and up and never coming down. And at some point, I don't care who you are, there is a threshold you will hit or surpass, and your body will just really say no. And there's lots around in the world right now being talked about that. The other thing I really like is the allostasis one that talks about us taking on stress in our lives and then continually taking on more stress and never coming down back to our baseline. So we go up, we take on more stress, we take on more stress. We may come down a little bit, we may go back up again. And we get up to here in terms of what we think our stress threshold is and our just general operating level of stress. When really our stress threshold should be down here, we should be trying to come back down to here, and we just never do. So you're always operating at this high stress mode. It's kind of chronic at this, in a sense. And then you're going to hit this threshold and surpass it at some point, just naturally. Or just by dealing with huge amounts of stress for really long periods in a time, it all just builds up. So have a think about this. You can't manage everything through exercise, even though it makes you feel good. There are set of things that we need to be doing in our life, and that's managing our emotional and psychological stresses, such that they don't become kind of a moderate amount for a really, really long time, or a really high amount for an unsustainable amount of time. We need to look after our physical health at the same time too, and that doesn't necessarily mean doing high intensity exercise. It just might mean eating better, moderately exercising, maybe investing more in yoga rather than high intensity practices, and lots of other things. I hope this video has been useful in highlighting to you kind of the negative, let's call it maybe the shadow side of exercise that no one ever talks about, because it's quite sexier just to get out with a workout and do this stuff. And look, I love this stuff. It's hard for me to talk about exercise in a negative way, but I've come to terms with that, and I'm going to manage it a lot better going forward. I want to keep doing this, and I don't want to encounter this kind of episode I've had recently where a lot of things are going on in my body and they don't massively make sense. And that's just because I've blown the doors off my nervous system in many ways. Yes, a lot of it I couldn't have helped with my dad getting sick and having to be there for him. But actually, there's lots of decisions I could have made that wasn't abandoning myself, which is definitely a topic I want to talk about in a future video.